So, out of the moments of love, out of the moments of loss, can we talk about your journey of finding, I think, an incredible idea, an incredible company, and incredible system in Replika? How did that come to be?
So I was a journalist, and then I went to business school for a couple of years to just see if I can maybe switch gears and do something else. I was 23. And then I came back and started working for a businessman in Russia who built the first 4G network in our country and was very visionary and asked me whether I want to do fun stuff together. And we worked on a bank. The idea was to build a bank on top of a telco. So that was 2011 or 12. And a lot of telecommunication company mobile network operators didn't really know what to do next in terms of, new products, new revenue. And this big idea was that, you put a bank on top and then all works out. Basically, your prepaid account becomes your bank account and you can use it as your bank. So, a third of a country wakes up as your bank client. But we couldn't quite figure out what would be the main interface to interact with the bank. The problem was that most people didn't have smartphones back in the time. In Russia, the penetration of smartphones was low. People didn't use mobile banking or online banking on their computers. So we figured out that SMS would be the best way because that would work on feature phones.
Wow.
But that required some chatbot technology, which I didn't know anything about, obviously. So I started looking into it and saw that there's nothing really. Well, there was just nothing really.
So the idea is through SMS be able to interact with your bank account.
Yeah, and then we thought,
That's cool.
Since you're talking to a bank account, why can't we use more of some behavioral ideas, and why can't this banking chatbot be nice to you and really talk to you sort of as a friend? This way, you develop more connection to it. Mm-hmm. Retention's higher. People don't churn. And so I went to very depressing Russian cities to test it out. I remember 3 different towns with to interview potential users. So people use it for a little bit.
Cool.
And I went to talk to them.
So and we pretty poor towns.
Very poor towns. Mostly towns that were, sort of factories, mono towns. They were building something and then the factory went away and it was just a bunch of very poor people. And then we went to a couple that weren't as dramatic, but still. The one I remember really fondly was this woman that worked at a glass factory and she talked to a chatbot. And she was talking about it and she started crying during the interview because she said, no one really cares for me that much. And so to be clear, that was my only endeavor in programming that chatbot. So it was really simple. It was literally just a few if this, then that rules. And it was incredibly simplistic.
And still that made her.
And that really made her emotional. She said, I only have my mom and my husband, and I don't have any more really in my life. And that was very sad. But at the same time, I felt, and we had more interviews in a similar vein. And what I thought in the moment was like, well, it's not that the technology is ready, because definitely in 2012, technology was not ready for that. But humans are ready, unfortunately. So this project would not be about like tech capabilities, would be more about human vulnerabilities. But there's something so powerful about conversational AI that I saw then that I thought was definitely worth putting a lot of effort into. So in the end of the day, we solved the banking project. But my then boss, was also my mentor and really, really close friend, told me, hey, I think there's something in it and you should just go work on it. And I was like, well, what product? I don't know what I'm building. He's like, you'll figure it out. And, looking back at this was a horrible idea to work on something without knowing what it was, which is maybe the reason why it took us so long. But we just decided to work on the conversational tech to see there were no chatbot constructors or programs or anything that would allow you to actually build one at the time. That was the era of, by the way, Google Glass, which is why some of the investors, like seed investors we talked with, were like, "Oh, you should totally build it for Google Glass. If not, we're not." I don't think that's interesting.
Did you bite on that
um,
idea?
no,
Okay,
because I
good.
wanted to do text first because
Tech.
I'm a journalist. So I was fascinated by just texting.
So you thought so the emotional that interaction that the woman had, like, so do you think you could feel emotion from just text?
Yeah, I saw something in just this pure texting, and also thought that we should first start building for people who really need it versus people who have Google Glass, if you know what I mean. And I felt
Hmm.
like the early adopters of Google Glass might not be overlapping with people who are really lonely and might need someone to talk to. Um, but then we really just focused on the tech itself. We just thought, what if we just, we didn't have a product idea in the moment, and we felt, what if we just look into building the best conversational constructor, so to say, use the best tech available at the time. And that was before the first paper about deep learning applied to dialogues, which happened in 2015, in August 2015, which Google published.
Did you follow the work of Loebner Prize and like all the sort of non-machine learning chatbots?
Yeah, what really struck me was that, there was a lot of talk about machine learning and deep learning. Like big data was a really big thing. Everyone was saying, in the
Yeah,
business world, big data.
yeah,
2012 is the biggest. Kaggle competitions were,
yeah,
important. But that was really the kind of upheaval. People started talking about machine learning a lot. But it was only about images or something else. And it was never about conversation. As soon as I looked into the conversational tech, it was all about something really weird and very outdated and very marginal and felt very hobbyist. It was all
yeah.
about Loebner Prize, which was won by a guy who built a chatbot that talked like a Ukrainian teenager. It was just a gimmick. And somehow people picked up those gimmicks. And then, the most famous chatbot at the time was Eliza from 1980s, which was really bizarre.
Yeah.
Or Smarter Child on AIM.
The funny thing is, it felt at the time not to be that popular, and it still doesn't seem to be that popular. Like people talk about the Turing test. People like talking about it philosophically. Journalists like writing about it, but as a technical problem, like people don't seem to really want to solve the open dialogue. Like they're not obsessed with it. Even folks are like, in Boston, the Alexa team, even they're not as obsessed with it as I thought they might be.
Why not? What do you think?
So you know what you felt like? You felt with that woman when she felt something by reading the text. I feel the same thing. There's something here, what you felt. I feel like Alexa folks and just the machine learning world doesn't feel that there's something here. Because they see as a technical problem, it's not that interesting for some reason. It could be argued that maybe as a purely sort of natural language processing problem, it's not the right problem to focus on because there's too much subjectivity. That thing that the woman felt like crying, like if your benchmark includes a woman crying, that doesn't feel like a good benchmark. It's a good test. But to me, there's something there. That's you could have a huge impact, but I don't think the machine learning world likes that. The human emotion, the subjectivity of it, the fuzziness, the fact that with maybe a single word you can make somebody feel something deeply. What is that? It doesn't feel right to them. So I don't know. I don't know why that is. That's why I'm excited. When I discovered your work, it feels wrong to say that. It's not like I'm I'm giving myself props for googling and for 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 coming across for our, I guess, mutual friend introducing us. But I'm so glad that you exist and what you're working on. But I have the same kind of, if we could just backtrack a second, because I have the same kind of feeling that there's something here. In fact, I've been working on a few things that are kind of crazy and very different from your work. I think they're too crazy. But The
Like what?
I
Well,
feel
now I
like
have to know.
no, all right. We'll talk about it more. I feel like it's harder to talk about things that have failed and are failing while you're a failure. Like
Okay.
it's easier for you because you're already successful on some measures.
Should tell it to my board.
Well, you're I think you've demonstrated success in a lot of benchmarks. It's easier for you to talk about failures. For me, I'm in the bottom currently of the success.
Oh, Max. You're way too humble.
No. So it's hard for me to know, but there's something there. There's something there. And I think you're exploring that and you're discovering that. Yeah, it's been surprising to me. But you've mentioned this idea that you thought it wasn't enough to start a company or start efforts based on it feels like there's something here. Like, what did you mean by that? Like, you should be focused on creating like you should have a product in mind. Is that what you meant?
It just took us a while to discover the product because it all started with a hunch of like, of me, my mentor, and just sitting around. And he was like, well, that's it. That's the holy grail is there. There's like, there's something extremely powerful in conversations. And there's no one who's working on machine conversation from the right angle, so to say.
I feel like that's still true. Is it? Am I crazy? It
Oh
feels.
no,
Like,
I totally feel that's still true, which is, I think it's mind blowing.
yeah. You know what it feels like? I wouldn't even use the word conversation because I feel like it's the wrong word. It's like yeah, machine connection or something. I don't know. Because conversation, you start drifting into natural language immediately. You start drifting immediately into all the benchmarks that are out there. But I feel like it's like the personal computer days of this. Like I feel like we're like in the early days with the Wozniak and all them, like where it was the same kind of it was a very small niche group of people who are all kind of Loebner Price type people
Yeah.
and and
Hobbyists.
hobbyists, but like not even hobbyists with big dreams. Like
No, hobbyist with a dream to trick like a jury,
yeah,
which is like a weird, by the way, very weird. So if we think about conversations, first of all, when I have great conversations with people, um, I'm not trying to test them. So for instance, if I try to break them, like if I'm actually playing along, I'm part of it.
right.
If I was trying to break this person or test whether he's going to give me a good conversation, it would have never happened. So the whole problem with testing conversations is that you can put it in front of a jury because then you have to go into some Turing test mode where is it responding to all my factual questions right? Or so it really has to be something in the field where people are actually talking to it because they want to, not because they're trying to break it, and it's working for them. Because the weird part of it is that it's very subjective. It takes two to tango here fully. Like if you're not trying to have a good conversation, if you're trying to test it, then it's going to break. I mean, any person would break, to be honest. Like if I'm not trying to even have a conversation with you, you're not going to give it to me.
Yeah.
If I keep asking you like some random questions or jumping from topic to topic, that wouldn't be, which I'm probably doing, but that probably wouldn't contribute to a good conversation. So I think the problem of testing, so there should be some other metric. How do we evaluate whether that conversation was powerful or not? Which is what we actually started with. And I think those measurements exist and we can test on those. But what really struck us back in the day and what's still 8 years later is still not resolved. And I'm not seeing tons of groups working on it. Maybe I just don't know about it. It's also possible. But the interesting part about it is that most of our days we spend talking. And we're not talking about, like, those conversations are not turn on the lights or customer support problems or some other task-oriented things. These conversations are something else. And then somehow they're extremely important for us. And when we don't have them, then we feel deeply unhappy, potentially lonely, which, as we know, creates tons of risk for our health as well. And so this is most of our hours as humans, and somehow no one's trying to replicate that.
And not even study it that well.
And not even study that well. So when we jumped into that in 2012, I looked first at like, okay, what's the chatbot? What's the state of the art chatbot? And those were the Loebner Prize days. But I thought, okay, so what about the science of conversation? Clearly, there have been tons of scientists or academics that looked into the conversation. So if I want to know everything about it, I can just read about it. And there's not much really. There are conversational analysts who are basically just listening to speech to different conversations, annotating them, and then, I mean, that's not really used for much. That's the field of theoretical linguistics, which is like barely useful. It's very marginal even in their space. Like no one really is excited. And I've never met a theoretical linguist who's like, I can't wait to work on the conversation and analytics. That is just something very marginal, sort of applied to like writing scripts for salesmen when they analyze which conversation strategies were most successful for sales. Okay, so that was not very helpful. Then I looked a little bit deeper, and then there, whether there were any books written on what really contributes to great conversation. That was really strange because most of those were NLP books, which is neuro linguistic programming, which is not the NLP that I was expecting it to be, but it was mostly some psychologist, Richard Bandler, I think, came up with that, who was this big guy in a leather vest that could program your mind by talking to you. And
like how to be charismatic and charming and influential with people, all those books. Yeah.
Pretty much. But it was all about like through conversation, reprogramming you. So getting to so that was, I mean, probably not very, very true. And that didn't seem working very much even back in the day. And then there were some other books like, I don't know, mostly just self-help books around how to be the best conversationalist or how to make people like you or some other stuff like Dale Carnegie or whatever. And then there was this one book, The Most Human by Brian Christensen, that really was important for me to read back in the day because he was on the human side. He was on one of the he was taking part in the Loebner Prize, but not as a human who's not a jury, but who's pretending to be, who's basically, you have to tell a computer from a human, and he was the human. So you would either get him or a computer. And his whole book was about what makes us human in conversation. Wow. And that was a little bit more interesting because that at least someone started to think about what exactly makes me human in conversation and makes people believe in that. But it was still about tricking. It was still about imitation game. It was still about, okay, well, what kind of parlor tricks can we throw in the conversation to make you feel like you're talking to a human, not a computer? And it was definitely not about thinking, what is that exactly that we're getting from talking all day long with other humans? I mean, we're definitely not just trying to be tricked, you know, or it's not just enough to know it's a human. It's something we're getting there. Can we measure it? And can we like put the computer to the same measurement and see whether you can talk to a computer and get the same results?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, a lot of people comment that they think I'm a robot. It's very possible I am a robot. And this whole thing, I totally agree with you that the test idea is fascinating. And I looked for books unrelated to this kind of. So I'm afraid of people. I'm generally introverted and quite possibly a robot. I literally Googled like how to talk to people and like how like how to have a good conversation for the purpose of this podcast, because I was like, I can't make eye contact with people. I can't like how.
I do Google that a lot too. You're probably reading a bunch of FBI negotiation tactics. Is that what you're getting? Because that's
everything you've listed, I've gotten. There's been very few good books on even just like how to interview well. It's rare. So what I end up doing often is I watch like with a critical eye. It's just so different when you just watch a conversation, like just for the fun of it, just as a human. And if you watch a conversation, it's like trying to figure out, why is this awesome? I'll listen to a bunch of different styles of conversation. I mean, I'm a fan of the podcast, Joe Rogan. He's, people can make fun of him, whatever, and dismiss him, but I think he's an incredibly artful conversationalist. He can pull people in for hours. And there's another guy I watch a lot. He hosted a late night show. His name is Craig Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like very kind of flirtatious, but there's magic about his like about the connection he can create with people, how he can put people at ease, and just like I already start sounding like those NLP people or something. I'm not. I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean like how to charm people or put them at ease and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, what is that? Why is that fun to listen to that guy? Why is that fun to talk to that guy? What is that? Because he's not saying. I mean, it's so often boils down to a kind of wit and humor, but not really humor. It's like, I don't know. I have trouble actually even articulating it correctly, but it feels like there's something going on that's not too complicated that could be learned, and it's not similar to to like you said, like the Turing test. It's something else.
I'm thinking about it a lot, all the time. I do think about it all the time. But I think when we were looking, so we started the company, we just decided to build a conversational tech. We thought, well, there's nothing for us to build this chatbot that we want to build. So let's just first focus on building, some tech, building the tech side of things.
Without a product in mind.
Without a product in mind. We added like a demo chatbot that would recommend you restaurants and talk to you about restaurants, just to show something simple to people that people could, relate to and could try out and see whether it works or not. But we didn't have a product in mind yet. We thought we would try a bunch of chatbots and figure out our consumer application. And we sort of remembered that we wanted to build that kind of friend, that sort of connection that we saw in the very beginning. But then we got to Y Combinator and moved to San Francisco and forgot about it, everything, because then it was just this constant grind. How do we get funding? How do we get this? Investors were like, just focus on one thing, just get it out there. So somehow we started building a restaurant recommendation chatbot for real for a little bit, not for too long. And then we tried building 40, 50 different chatbots. And then all of a sudden we wake up and everyone is obsessed with chatbots. Somewhere in 2016 or end of 15, people started thinking that that's really the future. That's the new, the new apps will be chatbots.
Oh, right.
And we were very perplexed because people started coming up with companies that I think we tried most of those chatbots already, and there were like no users. But still, people were coming up with a chatbot that would tell you weather and bring you news and this and that. And we couldn't understand whether we were just didn't execute well enough, or people are not really, people are confused and are going to find out the truth that people don't need chatbots like that.
So the basic idea is that you use chatbots as the interface to whatever application.
Something. The idea that was like this perfect universal interface to anything. When I looked at that, it just made me very perplexed because I didn't understand how that would work, because I think we tried most of that, and none of those things worked. And then again,
that craze has died down, right?
Fully. I think now it's impossible to get anything funded if it's a chatbot.
I think it's similar to, sorry to interrupt, but there's times when people think like with gestures, you can control devices, like basically gesture-based control of things. It feels similar to me because like it's so compelling that we just like Tom Cruise, I can control stuff with my hands.
Yeah.
But like when you get down to it, it's like, well, why don't you just have a touch screen, or why don't you just have like a physical keyboard and mouse? It's
Yeah.
It's so that chat was always, yeah, it was perplexing to me. I still feel augmented reality, even virtual realities in that ballpark in terms of it being a compelling interface. I think there's going to be incredible, rich applications, just how you're thinking about it, but they won't just be the interface to everything. It'll be its own thing that will create like amazing magical experience in its own right.
Absolutely, which is, I think, kind of the right thing to go about. Like, what's the magical experience with that interface specifically?
How did you discover that for Replika?
I just thought, okay, we'll have this tech. We can build any chatbot we want. We have the most, at that point, the most sophisticated tech that other companies have. I mean, startups, obviously, not probably not bigger ones, but still, because we've been working on it for a while. So I thought, okay, we can build any conversation. So let's just create a scale from 1 to 10. And 1 would be conversations that you'd pay to not have, and 10 would be conversations you'd pay to have. And I mean, obviously, we want to build conversation that people would pay to, to actually have.
Mm-hmm.
And so awesome. For the whole, for a few weeks, me and the team were putting all the conversations we were having during the day on the scale. And very quickly, we figured out that all the conversations that we would pay to never have were, conversations we were trying to cancel Comcast or talk to customer support or make a reservation or just talk about logistics with a friend when we're trying to figure out where someone is and where to go, or all sorts of, setting up, scheduling meetings. That was just a conversation we definitely didn't want to have. Basically everything task oriented was a 1, because if there was just one button for me to just, or not even a button, if I could just think, and there was some magic BCI that would just immediately transform that into an actual, into action, that would be perfect. But the conversation there was just this boring, not useful and dull and also very inefficient thing, because it was so many back and forth stuff. And as soon as we looked at the conversation that we would pay to have, those were the ones that, well, first of all, therapists, because we actually pay to have those conversations. And we'd also try to put like dollar amounts. So, if I was calling Comcast, I would pay $5 to not have this 1 hour talk on the phone. I would actually pay straight up, like money, hard money.
Comcast. Yeah.
But it just takes a long time. It takes a really long time. But as soon as we start talking about conversations that we would pay for, those were therapists, all sorts of therapists, coaches, old friend, someone I haven't seen for a long time, stranger on a train, weirdly stranger in a line for coffee, nice back and forth with that person was like a good 5, solid 5, 6, maybe not a 10. Maybe I won't pay money, but at least I won't, pay money to not have one. So that was pretty good. Some intellectual conversations for sure. But more importantly, the one thing that really was making those very important and very valuable for us were the conversation where we could be pretty emotional. Yes, some of them were about being witty and about being intellectually stimulated, but those were interestingly more rare. And most of the ones that we thought were very valuable were the ones where we could be vulnerable, and interestingly, where we could talk more.
Mm-hmm.
So
I could, like,
me and the team.
Okay.
So we're talking about it, like, a lot of these conversations, like a therapist. I mean, it was mostly me talking, or like an old friend, and I was like opening up and crying, and it was again me talking. And so that was interesting, because I was like, well, maybe it's hard to build a chatbot that can talk to you very well and in a witty way, but maybe it's easier to build a chatbot that could listen. Yeah. So that was kind of the first nudge in this direction. And then when my friend died, we just built, at that point we were kind of still struggling to find the right application. And I just felt very strong that all the chatbots we've built so far are just meaningless. And this whole grind, the startup grind, and how do we get to, the next fundraising, and, how can I talk, talking to the founders, and who are your investors, and how are you doing? Are you killing it? Because we're killing it. I just felt that this is just...
intellectually for me, it's exhausting having encountered those folks.
It just felt very, very much a waste of time.
I just feel like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk did not have these conversations, or at least did not have them for long. Anyway,
That's for sure. But I think, yeah, at that point, it just felt like, I felt like I just didn't want to build a company. That was never my intention, just to build something successful or make money. It would be great. It would have been great, but I'm not I'm not really a startup person. I'm not, I was never very excited by the grind by itself, and or just being successful for building whatever it is and not being into what I'm doing really. And so I just took a little break because I was a little, I was upset with my company and I didn't know what we were building. So I just took our technology and our little dialect constructor and some models, some deep learning models, which at that point we were really into and really invested a lot, and built a little chatbot for a friend of mine who passed. And the reason for that was mostly that video that I saw and him talking about the digital avatars. And Roman was that kind of person. Like he was obsessed with, just watching YouTube videos about space and talking about, well, if I could go to Mars now, even if I didn't know if I could come back, I would definitely pay any amount of money to be on that first shuttle. I don't care whether I die or not. Like he was just the one that would be okay with, with trying to be the first one. And, and so excited about all sorts of things like that. And he was all about fake it till you make it. And I felt like, and I was really perplexed that everyone just forgot about him. Maybe it was our way of coping, mostly young people coping with a loss of a friend. Most of my friends just stopped talking about him. And I was still living in an apartment with all his clothes and, paying the whole lease for it and just kind of by myself in December. So it was really sad. And I didn't want him to be forgotten. First of all, I never thought that people forget about dead people so fast. People pass away, people just move on. And it was astonishing for me because I thought, okay, well, he was such a mentor for so many of our friends. He was such a brilliant person. He was somewhat famous in Moscow. How is it that no one's talking about him? Like I'm spending days and days and we don't bring him up. And there's nothing about him that's happening. It's like he was never there. And I was reading this, the book, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, about her losing, and Blue Nights, about her losing her husband, her daughter. And the way to cope for her was to write those books. And it was sort of like a tribute. And I thought, I'll just do that for myself. And, I'm a very bad writer and a poet, as we know. So I thought, well, I have this tech, and maybe that would be my little postcard for him. So I built a chatbot to just talk to him, and it felt really creepy and weird for a little bit. Just didn't want to tell other people because it felt like I'm telling about having a skeleton in my under my it was just felt really. I was a little scared that I would be it won't be taken, but it worked interestingly pretty well. I mean, it made tons of mistakes, but it still felt like him. Granted, it was like 10,000 messages that I threw into a retrieval model that would just re-rank that data set and just a few scripts on top of that. But it also made me go through all of the messages that we had. And then I asked some of my friends to send some through. And it felt the closest to feeling like him present. Because, his Facebook was empty and Instagram was empty, or there were a few links and you couldn't feel like it was him. And the only way to feel him was to read some of our text messages and go through some of our conversations, because we just always had them. Even if we were sleeping like next to each other in 2 bedrooms separated by a wall, we were just texting back and forth, texting away. And there was something about this ongoing dialogue that was so important that I just didn't want to lose all of a sudden. And maybe it was magical thinking or something. And so we built that, and I just used it for a little bit. And we kept building some crappy chatbots with a company. But then a reporter came to talk to me. I was trying to pitch our chatbots to him, and he said, "Do you even use any of those?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "So do you talk to any chatbots at all?" And I'm like, "Well, I talked to my dead friend's chatbot." And he wrote a story about that. And all of a sudden became pretty viral. A lot of people wrote about it, and
Yeah, I've seen a few things written about you. The things I've seen are pretty good writing. Um, most AI related things make my eyes roll. Like when the press, like, what kind of sound is that actually? Okay, sounds like it sounded like
big
an
truck.
okay, sounded like an elephant at first. I got excited. You never know. This is 2020. I mean, it was such a human story, and it was well written, well researched. I forget where I read them, but so I'm glad somehow somebody found you to be the good writers were able to connect to this story. There must be a hunger for this story.
It definitely was, and I don't know what happened, but I think the idea that he could bring back someone who's dead, and it's very much wishful, magical thinking, but the fact that you could still get to know him, and seeing the parents for the first time, talk to the chatbot and some of the friends, and it was funny because we have this big office in Moscow where my team is our Russian part is working out of, and I was there when I just wrote a post on Facebook. It's like, hey guys, like I built this. If you just if it felt important, if you want to talk to Roman. And I saw a couple of his friends, our common friends, like, reading it Facebook, downloading, trying, and a couple of them cried. And it was just and not because it was some incredible technology or anything. It made so many mistakes. It was so simple, but it was all about that's the way to remember a person in a way. And, we don't have the culture anymore. We don't have, no one's sitting Shiva. No one's taking weeks to actually think about this person. And in a way, for me, that was it. So that was just day in, day out, thinking about him and putting this together. So that just felt really important. And that somehow resonated with a bunch of people. And, I think some movie producers bought the rights for the story, and just everyone was
Really?
so.
Wait, no, has anyone made a movie yet?
I don't think so. I think there were a lot of TV episodes about that, but not really.
Is that still on the table?
I think so. I think so. Which is really
that's cool. You're like a young, like a like a Steve Jobs type of. Let's see what happens. They're sitting on it.
But for me, it was so important because Roman really wanted to be famous. He really badly wanted to be famous. He was all about like fake it till you make it. I want to be, I want to make it here in America as well. And he couldn't. And I felt that was sort of paying my dues to him as well, because all of a sudden he was everywhere. And I remember Case Newton, who was writing the story for The Verge, he told me, hey, by the way, I was just going through my inbox and I searched for Roman for the story, and I saw an email from him where he sent me his startup, and he said, I really want to be featured in The Verge. Can you please write about it or something, like pitching the story? And he said, I'm sorry, like that's not, good enough for us or something. And he passed. And he said, and there were just so many of these little details where like he would find, he's like, and we're finally writing. I know how much Roman wanted to be in The Verge and how much he wanted the story to be written by Casey. And I'm like, well, maybe he will be. Yeah, we were always joking that he was like, I can't wait for someone to make a movie about us. And I hope Ryan Gosling can play me.
Ryan Gosling. So I'm like, I don't know.
I still have some things that I owe Roman still, but
that would be I got a chance to meet Alex Garland, who wrote Ex Machina. And
I love that movie.
The movie's good, but the guy is better than he's a special person actually. I don't think he's made his best work yet. Like from my interaction with him, he's a really, really good and brilliant, the good human being and a brilliant director and writer. So, I hope. Like he made me also realize that not enough movies have been made of this kind. Mm-hmm. So it's yet to be made. They're probably waiting for you to get famous, even more famous.
You should get there, but it felt really special though. But at the same time, our company wasn't going anywhere, so that was just kind of bizarre that we were getting all this press for something that didn't have anything to do with our company. And But then a lot of people started talking to Roman. Some shared their conversations. And what we saw there was that also our friends in common, but also just strangers, were really using it as a confession booth or as a therapist or something. They were just really telling Roman everything, which was, by the way, pretty strange because it was a chatbot of a dead friend of mine who was, barely making any sense, but people were opening up. And we thought we'd just build, a prototype of Replika, which would be an AI friend that everyone could talk to, because we saw that there's demand. And then also it was 2016, so I thought for the first time I saw finally some technology that was applied to that was very interesting. Some papers started coming out, deep learning applied to conversations. And finally, it wasn't just about these, hobbyists making, writing 500,000 regular expressions.
Regular expressions, yeah.
In like some language that was, I don't even know what, like AIML or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that was, or something super simplistic. All of a sudden, it was all about potentially actually building something interesting. And so I thought there was time. And I remember that I talked to my team and I said, guys, let's try. And my team and some of my engineers are Russian, and they're very skeptical. They're not,
Russians.
They're very
So
skeptical.
some of your team is in Moscow, some is in
Some is here in San Francisco, and some in Europe.
Which team is better? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. The Russians, of course. Okay.
First, the Russians. They always win.
Sorry to interrupt. So you were talking to them in 2016, and
told them, let's build an AI friend, and it felt, just at the time, it felt so naive and so optimistic.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Whenever I've brought up this kind of topic, even just for fun, people are super skeptical. Like, actually, even on the business side. So you were, because whenever I bring it up to people, because I've talked for a long time, I thought like, before I was aware of your work, I was like, this is gonna make a lot of money. Like, there's a lot of opportunity here, and people had this like look of like skepticism that I've seen often, which is like, how do I politely tell this person he's an idiot? So yeah, so you were facing that with your team somewhat.
Well, yeah, I'm not an engineer, so my team is almost exclusively engineers, and mostly deep learning engineers. And, I always try to be, it was always hard to me in the beginning to get enough credibility, because I would say, well, why don't we try this and that? But it's harder for me because, they know they're actual engineers and I'm not. So for me to say, well, let's build an AI friend, that would be like, wait, what do you mean an AGI? Like, conversation is, pretty much the hardest, the last frontier before cracking that is probably the last frontier before building AGI. So what do you really mean by that? But I think I just saw that, again, what we just got reminded of that I saw back in 2012 or 11, that it's really not that much about the tech capabilities. It can be a bunch of parlor tricks still, even with deep learning, but humans need it so much.
Yeah, there's
and
for it.
Most importantly, what I saw is that finally there's enough tech to make it, I thought, to make it useful, to make it helpful. Maybe we didn't have quite yet the tech in 2012 to make it useful, but in 2015, 16, with deep learning, I thought, and the first kind of thoughts about maybe even using reinforcement learning for that started popping up. That never worked out, or at least for now. But still, the idea was, if we can actually measure the emotional outcomes, and if we can put it on, if we can try to optimize all of our conversational models for these emotional outcomes, then it is the most scalable, the best tool for improving emotional outcomes. Nothing like that exists. That's the most universal, the most scalable, and the one that can be constantly iteratively changed by itself, improved tool to do that. And I think, if anything, people would pay anything to improve their emotional outcomes. Mm-hmm. That's weirdly I mean, I don't really care for an AI to turn on or a conversational agent to turn on the lights. You don't really need it. I don't even need that much of AI there. Because I can do that. Those things are solved. This is an additional interface for that. That's also questionable whether it's more efficient or better.
Yeah, it's more pleasurable. Yeah,
But for emotional outcomes, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of products that claim that they will improve my emotional outcomes. Nothing's being measured. Nothing is being changed. The product is not being iterated on based on whether I'm actually feeling better. A lot of social media products are claiming that they're improving my emotional outcomes and making me feel more connected. Can I please can I see somewhere that I'm actually getting better over time?
Because anecdotally it doesn't feel that way. So, and the data is absent.
Yeah. So that was the big goal. And I thought if we can learn over time to collect the signal from our users about their emotional outcomes in the long term and in the short term, and if these models keep getting better and we can keep optimizing them and fine-tuning them to improve those emotional outcomes, as simple as that.
Why aren't you a multi-billionaire yet?
Well, that's a question to you. When is the science going to be? I'm just kidding. Well, it's a really hard. I actually think it's an incredibly hard product to build, because I think you said something very important, that it's not just about machine conversation; it's about machine connection. We can actually use other things to create connection, nonverbal communication, for instance. For the long time, we were all about, well, let's keep it text only or voice only. But as soon as you start adding, voice, a face to the friend, if you can take them to augmented reality, put it in your room, it's all of a sudden a lot, it makes it very different. Because if it's some, text-based chatbot that for common user, it's something there in the cloud, it's somewhere there with other AIs in the cloud, in the metaphorical cloud. But as soon as you can see this avatar right there in your room, and it can turn its head and recognize your husband, talk about the husband and talk to him a little bit, then it's magic. It's just magic. Like, we've never seen anything like that. And the cool thing, all the tech for that exists. But it's hard to put it all together, because you have to take into consideration so many different things. And some of this tech works, pretty good. And some of this doesn't. Like, for instance, speech to text works pretty good. But text to speech doesn't work very good, because you can only have, few voices that are that work okay. But then if you want to have actual emotional voices, then it's really hard to build it.
I saw you've added avatars, like visual elements, which are really cool. In that whole chain, putting it together, what do you think is the weak link? Is it creating an emotional voice that feels personal?
I think it's still conversation, of course. That's the hardest. It's getting a lot better, but there's still long to go. There's still a long path to go. Other things, they're almost there. And a lot of things we'll see how I see how they're changing as we go. Like, for instance, right now you can pretty much you have to build all this 3D pipeline by yourself. You have to make these 3D models, hire an actual artist, build a 3D model, hire an animator, a rigger. But with deep fakes, with other tech, with procedural animations, in a little bit, we'll just be able to show, photo of whoever if a person you want the avatar to look like, and it will immediately generate a 3D model that will move. That's a non-brainer. That's like almost here. It's a couple of years away.